Hey everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and as promised, I am back to continue on working on these beautiful little marquees, and also we're going to talk about the overall design of the necklace. I already showed you guys how to make this marquee right here, where we picked up our bead count was 2 corner beads, 27 delicas, 2 corners, 27 delicas. On the smaller unit here, the bead pickup is, of course, 2 corner beads, 21 delicas, 2 corner, and 21. And here's how that came out, just a little bit smaller. The initial component, which is the central component, I picked up 2 corner beads, 33, 2 corners, and 33. And that was how we started out. I showed you how to make the component, so we have our component made. Today I'm going to show you how to sew in the embellishment on this medium-sized one, which I use this beautiful little 10mm peridot bead. And then I'll show you one more time on how to use the smaller bead, which is a 4mm fire polish. And at the end, I'm going to discuss with you how I made the bezel and what beads I used to connect this. But I thought it would be easier for you to understand this once I show you how to insert these two. So if you're just joining in and you haven't watched the previous video, the main color of seed beads I used were this lovely Fern Gold Luster Toho for my turn beads here at the corner. And I used these beautiful opaque cactus luster Miyuki Delicas for the beads here. And then I also showed you guys how to use the Fern Gold beads here to create this lovely accent on our odd count row at the end, which we used to zip the component closed. So to get started, I had just completed this component here. And also on this one, I left my tail thread hanging so I could have plenty of thread to add the final accent bead. So I had finished zipping closed the component, and I'm exiting the bead that I started my zipping closed from, which is this tip bead here on one end. Now to insert the bead, obviously we have to get into the center. So what we're going to do is just sew down all the beads on the column, which is on the same side that our working thread was exiting. So here to the right. So I'm going down these 5 beads on the right. And I'm going to pull that through. Try not to stab your fingers. And get that thread pulled all the way through. Make sure nothing's visible and all of that. So we talked about the row 1 beads also in the previous video. When we picked up our initial count, we picked up the beads for rows 1 and 2. As we stitched the 3rd row of beads, the row 1 beads were pushed out to the side, and they sit kind of individually. And here I'm going to try to show you what I'm talking about. So if you look here in the center, this bead right there is the row 1 bead. So row 1, row 1. You'll see how it skips a little gap in between each row 1 bead. 1, 1, 1, 1. So we're going to be using those row 1 beads on both sides of the inside of the component to connect our accents so that they come out looking even and the beads sit straight, or in this case, the peyote bezel sits in there nice, looks really uniform because we use the same beads to connect inside. So for the smaller bead, on the smallest component, I used the 2nd row 1 bead here and here to connect this 4mm. On the middle-sized component, I used the 3rd row 1 bead here and here to connect the larger bead. And on the bigger component, I used 3 different beads to connect to this larger peyote bezel. I used the 4th, 6th, and 8th bead. And I used the same beads, row 1 beads, on the bezel here to connect into those beads here. So if you'll look at the bezel, you'll see that I have rows 1, 2, 3 are all this fern gold. So you can see that little bead that sits to itself in the center. Those are the row 1 beads. This is these are the second and third row beads here. So that's how I determined how I wanted to attach everything inside of the little components. So right now I am exiting from that fern gold bead, and I'm going to need to sew up to the, let's see which one I'm on here. I need to sew up to the third row 1 bead here on the inner edge of this component. To do that, it's going to be easier for me to, I can dig my needle into that row, that first row 1 bead, or I can come out here to the row 2 bead and get my needle in a little bit easier. So if you look really closely, you can see that I'm going through the row 2 bead and then the very first row 1 bead. So I'm going to push my needle through and pull. Then I'm going to do that 2 more times until I'm coming out of that third row 1 bead. So if you look inside, you can see that my working thread is exiting the first row 1 bead. So I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to go through the next row 2 and row 1 beads right there. Pull. And it's a little bit tight. Just go ahead and pull it. This is another reason you guys see that I bend my needles all to pieces all the time, but I like the flexible needle for this. So I have got to go into the third row 1 bead. Hey, upon closer inspection, I realized I was going through the row 3 and row 2 beads. So I went through the row 3 and row 2 bead, the row 3 and row 2 bead, and now I can just sew into that third row 1 bead here in the center. Yeah, just take your time. It's a little bit difficult because it's kind of tight. You'll have to wiggle your needle around to get in there. But you want to just make sure you're coming through only that 1 bead. As you can see, I'm accidentally passing through 2. So I've got to back out of this one and go into just the 1 bead. If you're having trouble getting it from one side, all you got to do is pass your needle through the center and bring the whole thread around and go at it from the other angle. Sometimes that will help you get into that tight bead. As you can see, I'm going just through that third row 1 bead right there. So it was easier from this side. The only thing is you're going to have to pay attention to what side of the beadwork your working thread is on. This side or this side. So now we can go ahead and pick up this bead. Now I'm just going to let it drop down. So let's take a look at, I've got my thread laying here to the back side of the work. My working thread is coming out of the top of the row 3 bead here. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go from top to bottom through the row 3 bead on the other side of the component. And I'm going to go ahead and pull. And you see how that gets my bead into position. What I've been doing is I was just holding this bead with my thumb so that the line of thread stays straight, like this. Now I just need to come back through this bead. And remember, we were exiting the top of the row 1 bead on this left side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my needle in there and I'm going to go through the bottom of that row 3 bead, or the row 1/3 bead, but it's going to be easier from the other side. So I'm going to take my needle and just pass it through the center so I can actually see what I'm doing. And you don't want to cross your thread, so I just simply make sure that I didn't cross over the top of that working thread that was already in there. So now I can loosen this up so that I can get my needle into position. I want to come back through that bead from bottom to top. You see the bead that I'm exiting right there. So I'm going to come through that bead from bottom to top. So you can see that I've got my needle going back through that bead from bottom to top. And to help you along, take the other thread and pull your bead in there, position it the way that you want it. Get it nice and snug. And then pull your needle through and pull that thread nice and tight. At this point, you still have just a little bit of wiggle room with the bead, but not a lot. So now all we have to do is come through the bead in the center again. Notice my working thread's situated on the front. And we want to go again through the bead on the opposite side, the third bead. It's going to be a little bit difficult this time because you have, already tightened this bead down. So just take your time and figure out which side of the beadwork it's going to be easier for you to get to that bead from. I think it's going to be easier on this side, so I'm going to come back through that center. If you run into a difficult time seeing what you're doing, go ahead and put your headset on. I love this headset. I'll put a link to it up on the corresponding blog post. This is one I've been using for about 3 or 4 years. It's really inexpensive, and you can change the magnification lenses out as you need to. Just take your time and keep working at it until you actually get your needle through the third row 1 bead. Making sure, that you're keeping track of what side of the beadwork your working thread is on. And then once you pull it in, you can see that your bead is sitting perfectly straight across and that everything's in there nice and snug. So now we've already passed through this bead a couple of times and it's really secure. This is not a component that's going to get a lot of serious wear and tear. So I feel like 2 threads through is going to be plenty. Just make sure you got the bead situated so you don't have a lot of white exposed thread showing. That looks pretty good. So now we can sew around and end our thread. So now what I'm doing here is I'm coming through the row 2 bead and then I'm sewing straight up on this diagonal line to get myself out towards the outer edge of the component, which is going to make it a lot easier to weave your thread off or to tie some half-hitch knots. In case you don't know how to tie a half-hitch knot in peyote, I'll show you one. So I'm exiting from this bead right there. I can take my needle and go under this little thread bridge right in front of that bead. Just like this. See how I'm under that thread bridge? Pull till I have my loop. Pass the needle back through the loop. And then pull that knot right down into position in front of that same bead that I was exiting, just like that. And when you remember that when you move to another position, that you sew on that diagonal line. So to weave the thread off, you would simply sew back and forth on the diagonal several times. See, I'm exiting this bead. I can come over to the bead that's right beside it and then sew on the diagonal once again in the opposite direction like that. So you can use whichever method of those that you choose to end the thread. Just make sure that you've nicely secured the thread to several weaves back and forth if that's your choice, or tie at least 2 to 3 half-hitch knots. Remember to move away from that last knot before you cut the thread. So there we have these components already completed. So I'll show you one more, and I will show you how to add the smaller bead here on the smallest component. And then one more time I'll go back over which beads to use to connect your peyote bezel. So on this component, I had already sewn down through the 5 fern gold beads on the side. And now I'm sewing through row 3, row 2, the first set. And on this one, we only have to go up to the second bead. So once I pull that into position, all I have to do is sew into that second row 1 bead here. There's the first one, there's the second one. So as you can see, I'm sewing just into that second row, first row bead here. And go ahead and pull my thread through. And we're going to do the same exact thing, only we're just going to use the little 4mm Peyote fire polish. So now I'm going to sew down that second row 1 bead on the other side of my component. I've picked up my fire polish. As you can see here, look, I had not double checked where my working thread was. But don't worry, it's an easy fix. You just simply take your needle off and pull the thread back out. And of course, rethread your needle. All right, let's give that another go. I'm going to pass my needle through my component because I want to be on the back side. I'm going to find that second row 1 bead, and I'm going to sew right down through it. Now I'm going to pull my bead into position. I'm going to sew back through that fire polish. Now I already have a working thread coming out of the top of the bead here on my base. So now I want to come and put a thread bridge at the bottom. So I'm going to sew back up through that bead. And once again, just determine which way it's easier for you to see the bead. I might need to go through and come at it from this side, which is going to be the easiest way for me to get it back into that bead. And pass my needle right straight through, trying just to hit that 1 bead. If you can't hit that 1 bead, just sew back up on the diagonal, just like we did earlier. So now I'm going to hit that bead, but I can sew back up on the diagonal. Then I can sew back down and put another thread through my little fire polish. And I want to make sure I set it straight across from each other so that the line of thread through the bead is straight. So I'm going to sew myself back down. I'm exiting this bead here. I'm crossing over in the reversing direction through the bead right next to it, sewing myself back on that diagonal line, back down to where I need to be. After I sew back into that second bead of row 1, I'm going to pass back through my fire polish as I've done here. And I'm going to put that additional thread bridge on the row 1 bead here on the other side of the component. Which if you remember, I sewed down the first time, so I need to sew up through the bead. And this time I'm also going to cross through all the beads on the diagonal once again, because now I can end my thread once I put that last thread in place to secure the accent bead. And then I'm just going to end my thread just like I did on this component, and I'll meet you back. All right, just one last time, I'm going to show you once again exactly where I connected this peyote bezel. I connected it to the 4th, the 6th, and the 8th row 1 beads here on my component. And I did that on both sides so that the bezel is secured evenly and it looks really nice and uniform. So now I'm going to talk about the layout of the design just a little bit here. Let me go back to my drawing. If you remember in the first video, I told you I had these beautiful wasabi 2-hole carrier beads that I wanted to incorporate into this design because that's this beautiful wasabi 14mm Rivoli that I used here. Now, in order to lay this out, we want this to flow around and create a natural curve. In order for the natural curve to exist and to accommodate for the 2-hole beads, what you will want to do is I'm probably going to just use bead stringing wire and string this portion of my necklace together. I haven't decided about what I want to do past this carrier bead, but I'll figure that out for the next video. In order to create this natural curve, though, what you will want to take into consideration is that the beads that you incorporate on the lower hole of your carrier bead are going to need to be bigger than the ones at the top. By making these smaller, that's going to give us a natural curve and flow to the overall look of the design. So I laid this out here just to demonstrate for you how I'm thinking about going about this. So I have some relatively, these are probably an 8mm bead. These are 6mm beads, these bicones. And then I have some 4mm, carry on with the 4mm fire polish beads along the top there. So this is what we've got so far, and I think it's looking quite lovely. Now, of course, you can use, if you decide to use seed beads also, you'll want to stick with the matching color here. So I could basically incorporate some of these fern gold seed beads along the way to tie the look of the overall look of everything completely together. But we'll save all that for another day. Another reason that I love beading and this type of creative layout is that not only could you make a necklace out of this, but you could actually do bead embroidery onto the collar of a shirt, or, you know, create this as an applique that can be sewn as one unit onto a blouse, a purse, anything that, you know, has a slight curve. It's just really pretty. I like making appliques. I haven't done one in a long time, so maybe that's what I'll come up with, and when I get back, I'll show you guys how you could go about doing something like that. I do have plans for making a brick stitch applique that you can incorporate into clothing or a purse coming up this year. I also have plans for my version of a beaded ginkgo leaf. I sat for a couple of weeks trying to figure out how to make those. I don't have one laying here. I'd show it to you. So that's something we're going to work on coming up pretty soon here on my channel and over on the blog. But that's it for today. So you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like what you see. Go ahead and click the like button if you like this video. Head over to my website, sign up for my newsletter, and add your email list to follow that blog. Sometimes I post things over there that don't make it to YouTube, so you might be missing out on some great bead tutorials there. All right, folks, that's it. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.